You tied the last ribbon, telling yourself this time would be different. The yard shimmered with balloons, the cake waited with 9 bright candles, and your daughter's eyes sparkled with a hope only children carry. Yet as each minute passed, the gate stayed closed, and her gaze lingered on a silence that grew heavier than words. What would you do if the people who should have cherished her left her waiting again? This story isn't just about a missed party. It's about the moment love is tested and courage takes root. Stay with me, because what followed will stay in your heart. And if stories like this speak to you, a gentle like and subscribe will keep us walking together. The candles flickered in the afternoon light, waiting for voices that never came. You try to distract yourself with the hum of the bounce house, the chatter of classmates, the scent of frosting drifting through the yard. But every few minutes, your daughter's eyes would wander back toward the gate. Her small shoulders lifted with each sound, then fell again when it was only another neighbor, another classmate's parent, another person who wasn't her family. And with each disappointed glance, you felt a quiet fracture inside your chest, like glass cracking slowly but surely. This wasn't the first time, and a part of you knew it wouldn't be the last. Memories crowded in. Christmas mornings when you spent money you didn't have just to make sure the tree was full of gifts, only to receive a single card in return. Months earlier, when your younger sister couldn't pay the salon rent, you drained your savings without hesitation, believing that family mattered more than numbers on a screen. Each time, they said thank you quickly, casually, as if your sacrifice were nothing unusual, just another task assigned to the responsible one. And that role, the one they chose for you, had followed you for years. The day your father walked out, your mother's words etched themselves into your memory. You're the head of this family now. It hadn't been a request, or a gentle acknowledgement. It was a declaration, a passing of burdens you hadn't agreed to carry. From that moment, you weren't a daughter anymore, you were a provider, an anchor, a bank account they could access whenever storms rolled in. But standing there, watching your child's hope fade in real time, you felt the weight of those years like never before. Because it wasn't just your heart being neglected, it was hers. A child who deserved nothing less than unconditional love, who deserved the joy of being celebrated without conditions, without excuses, without the gnawing absence of people who claimed to care. You looked down at your phone, the screen glowing with the cruel simplicity of a message. Don't be dramatic. It's just a kid's party. We'll make it up to her at Christmas. The words blurred as tears stung your eyes. Just a party. Just her birthday. Just another wound your daughter would carry quietly, the kind that doesn't leave bruises, but lingers deep in the soul. Still, you pushed through the afternoon. You smiled for photos, cut the cake, handed out slices of pizza and juice boxes. Mina laughed with her friends, bounced in the inflatable castle, and opened her gifts with the pure excitement only children can hold on to. But every so often, her voice trembled as she asked, "Did Grandma forget? Are my aunts still coming?" Close quote. And each time, your answer felt like a betrayal, even though you softened it with as much hope as you could muster. By the time the last classmate was picked up, the balloons had begun to wilt, and the plates sat stacked on the counter. You washed them quietly, tears dripping into the sink. Outside, your daughter drew rainbows on the pavement with her new chalk, her laughter carrying into the evening air. It should have been enough. And yet, the silence of your family's absence pressed harder than any noise could. That night, your phone buzzed again. Another request, dressed up as an emergency. This time, $350. The timing was almost cruel during the very hours they'd chosen to be elsewhere, raising glasses of champagne in a restaurant, instead of showing up for a little girl who had waited by the window. Something broke inside you then, not loudly, but in a way that couldn't be undone. The days that followed blurred together. You worked, you cooked, you tucked your daughter into bed with notes of love folded into her lunchbox. But inside, a question churned louder and louder. How much longer could you carry everyone else while your own child carried disappointment? And then came the final straw. A week later, a new message landed in the family group chat, laced with entitlement, not even masked as a request. They expected you to pay nearly $2,000 for a party that wasn't yours, for a sister whose milestones had always been deemed more important than your child's. Your photo had already been placed on the sponsorship flyer without your permission, without your consent, as though your sacrifice was guaranteed. Your hands trembled as you read. Every bill, every sleepless night, every tear shed over balances stretched too thin came rushing back. And for once, instead of swallowing the anger, you let it burn steady inside you. Not chaotic, but clarifying. For the first time in years, you chose to draw a line. You sent a single dollar. Nothing more. Just one small coin in a sea of demands. And in the memo line, you wrote one word that said everything. Congrats. It was the kind of act that seems insignificant to the world, but to you, it was a declaration. A shift. A reclaiming of dignity that had been eroded piece by piece. You saved the confirmation, a symbol that you had finally spoken the word your family never allowed you to. No. In that moment, as your daughter hummed in the next room, you realized something profound. Protecting her wasn't just about giving her braces, or paying for school supplies, or covering bills on time. Protecting her meant shielding her from the cycle you had been trapped in. Showing her that love was not measured by money or manipulation. Teaching her that family should be built on respect, not obligation. And so, the first chapter of a new story began. One where your worth wasn't dictated by their demands. One where your daughter could see, through your courage, that she was never alone even when others walked away. Because real family shows up. And when they don't, you have the right to close the door, to change the locks, to redefine what family truly means. So, as you sit with this story, ask yourself, what would you have done standing in that backyard, watching your child's hope fade? If stories like this remind you of the strength it takes to stand up, consider joining this journey. A quiet tap on like or subscribe is more than support, it's a way of saying you believe that every voice, every story, deserves to be heard. The dollar you sent was more than a transaction, it was a signal. Yet almost instantly, the silence that followed broke into thunder. Messages poured in, words sharp enough to sting through the screen. Accusations of betrayal, claims that you'd embarrassed the family, reminders of everything they believed you owed them. It was as if years of quiet giving had vanished, erased by a single moment of refusal. Still, you felt strangely calm. For the first time, you weren't bending under their demands. You were standing, even if your knees trembled. And in that calmness, you began to see patterns you had ignored for years, the way every crisis was turned into your responsibility, the way every promise was reshaped into an expectation. But calm doesn't last long when people are used to control. A week later, the pounding on your front door jolted you from dinner with your daughter. Through the peephole, you saw them, your mother, your sisters' faces tightened with anger. Their voices carried through the wood, calling your name, insisting you owed them explanations, owed them money, owed them everything. Your daughter's small hands gripped your sweater as she whispered, "Mom, is that Grandma?" Close quote. You knelt down, steadying your voice. "Yes, but this isn't respectful behavior. And we talked about respect, didn't we?" Close quote. She nodded, her stuffed rabbit pressed tightly to her chest. The banging grew louder, then the doorbell chimed again and again. And just when you thought the storm couldn't grow louder, blue lights painted the windows. The police had been called. Your breath caught as the officer approached, clipboard in hand, posture calm but firm. Inside, you laid out your truth. Receipts, text messages, the Venmo screenshot. You explained the years of support, the debts unpaid, the boundaries crossed. The officer listened, his expression shifting as each detail unfolded. Finally, he nodded, offering words you hadn't expected. "They're used to you carrying everything. Change is hard for people like that. But you have every right to protect yourself and your child." And with those words, something lifted from your shoulders. It wasn't just validation, it was recognition. For so long, you had been told you were overreacting, dramatic, selfish. Now, for once, someone acknowledged what you knew in your bones. This wasn't love. It was control. Outside, your family scattered back to their cars, throwing glances sharp as daggers. You closed the door, double-checked the lock, and turned toward your daughter, who stood watching with wide eyes. "Are we safe?" Close quote. She whispered. You pulled her close, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe. And you are the most important thing in my world." That night, after tucking her into bed, you sat in the quiet kitchen with your thoughts. The word safe echoed in your mind. For years, you had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over her head, food on the table, lights glowing in her room. But Rue's safety wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was freedom from manipulation, from guilt, from the weight of promises that never belonged to you. Your phone buzzed again. Another message, sharp and simple. "You regret this. Family is everything." You deleted it without hesitation. Because family, you realized, isn't defined by demands. It's defined by presence. By showing up when balloons need tying and candles need lighting. By love that doesn't come with a price tag. The days ahead tested you. Social media posts painted you as selfish. Relatives you hadn't spoken to in years sent you messages, urging you to make peace, close quote, not knowing or not caring about the cost of that peace. Invitations came laced with conditions. Forgiveness in exchange for money, acceptance in exchange for silence. You placed each card, each note, in a drawer. And for the first time, you didn't let the guilt consume you. Instead, you turned toward those who had quietly stood by all along. Aunt Carol, with her gentle encouragement. Mrs. Wilson, with her casseroles and watchful care. A co-worker willing to trade shifts so you could breathe. And most of all, your daughter who looked up at you not with disappointment, but with newfound confidence as she declared at school, "My mom is my hero." It wasn't easy. Setting boundaries never is. There were nights you lay awake, replaying every word, questioning whether you had gone too far. But then you'd remember the look on your daughter's face at her birthday, the way her shoulders slumped, the way her voice trembled, and the doubt would quiet. Because no matter what anyone else said, you knew this. She deserved better. The weeks passed, and life began to feel lighter. Grocery shopping wasn't a tightrope of numbers anymore. You bought flowers for the table, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Small moments felt like victories. A walk in the park, laughter over spaghetti, quiet evenings filled with cartoons instead of conflict. One evening, your daughter drew 2 stick figures on a piece of paper, you and her standing beneath a rainbow. She taped it proudly to the fridge and said, "This is our family." And in that simple drawing, you found more truth than in every speech your relatives had ever given. If this journey resonates with you, I'd be honored if you stayed close. A gentle tap on like or subscribe isn't just for me, it's a way of saying you believe in stories that remind us we are not alone, that even in betrayal, hope can still take root. The house felt different after that night. Not just quieter, but lighter, as if walls that had pressed in for years finally eased back. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was healing. For the first time, your evenings weren't filled with buzzing phones and demands dressed as emergencies. Instead, you filled them with things that mattered. Helping your daughter with her school projects, folding laundry while she sang to herself in the next room, cooking simple meals that carried laughter instead of tension. One morning, while brewing coffee, you opened your laptop and stared at the spreadsheet where you had tracked every dollar sent, every favor done, every piece of yourself surrendered. The numbers glared back. More than $23,000 over the years. You thought about what that amount could have meant: braces, vacations, savings, maybe even the down payment on a future home. Yet, strangely, you didn't feel anger anymore. What you felt was clarity. The numbers told a story you hadn't wanted to see before. You had been pouring into a well that would never fill. And now, finally, you were done. That decision freed more than your finances. It freed your spirit. Without the constant drain, you discovered small luxuries you had forgotten. On grocery trips, you no longer calculated every cent with trembling precision. You allowed yourself to pick up fresh flowers, not because they were needed, but because they brightened the kitchen table. You bought your daughter a sketchbook she had been asking for, and the way her eyes lit up as she turned its pages felt worth more than any expensive celebration your family had ever thrown. It was in those small moments that you began to understand the difference between obligation and love. Obligation drains you. Love restores you. And restoration began showing itself in unexpected places. Mrs. Wilson from 2 doors down, the neighbor who always seemed to appear at the right time, started bringing over baked bread on weekends. Sometimes it was banana, sometimes cinnamon, always warm and wrapped in foil. Just because Flo's quote, she'd say with a smile. You noticed the way your daughter rushed to the door whenever she knocked, her laughter spilling into the hall. To her, Mrs. Wilson wasn't just a neighbor anymore, she was family. At work, James, always quick with a kind word, offered to help build shelves for your living room. He showed up one Saturday carrying wood and tools, his easy laughter filling the spaces that once echoed with arguments. Together, you sanded and painted, your daughter arranging her books by color once the shelves stood tall. The room looked brighter, more alive, as if new roots were taking hold. And then there was Aunt Carol. She called often, checking in without judgment, reminding you that not all blood ties bring pain. She drove 3 hours just to spend a weekend baking cookies with your daughter, filling the house with the scent of sugar and vanilla. She listened as you spoke about the struggles of setting boundaries, and she nodded with the knowing patience of someone who had seen it all before. "You don't owe anyone your peace," close quote, she said softly. And neither does she. Her words settled into your chest like seeds, ready to grow. Your daughter blossomed too. At school, her teacher sent home a note. "She seems more confident these days. She raises her hand more often, smiles more freely. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Reading that, your eyes filled, because you knew it wasn't just what you were doing. It was what you were no longer allowing. On a quiet evening, she brought home a project titled My Hero. On the poster, 2 stick figures held hands beneath a sunset, one taller, one smaller. Above them, she had written in bold letters, "My mom taught me that love doesn't hurt." You touched the paper with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the simplicity and depth of her truth. For so long, you had carried guilt for not giving her a larger family, for not surrounding her with grandparents and aunts who cheered her on. But in that moment, you realized she didn't need more. She needed better. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Where once your calendar was cluttered with obligations, family events, sudden emergencies, endless demands, it now held plans that brought joy. Movie nights written in her handwriting. Park days circled with bright markers. Visits with neighbors who had quietly become protectors. These weren't obligations. They were choices. Choices rooted in love. Of course, the shadows of the past still reached for you. Social media posts appeared, dripping with accusations, painting you as selfish. Invitations arrived with conditions, thinly veiled attempts to pull you back into old patterns. But you no longer felt the pull. You read them, placed them aside, and returned to the life you were building. Because for the first time, you could see the truth clearly. Peace was worth more than approval. Your daughter noticed, too. One day, while walking home from school, she slipped her hand into yours and said quietly, "I like our life now. It feels happy." The simplicity of her words struck you deeper than any lecture, any sermon, any guilt-ridden letter ever could. You began to paint the walls of your living room a soft yellow, your daughter giggling as she pointed out missed spots, her own shirt covered in little splashes. Together, you transformed the beige into sunshine, laughter echoing with each stroke of the brush. The house itself seemed to smile back at you. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. Imperfect meals, messy rooms, chalk drawings fading on the driveway, all of it carried more meaning than the grandest event your family had ever planned. Because this was real. This was yours. Late one evening, you sat at the kitchen table, the smell of paint still lingering. On the fridge, her drawing of the two of you hung beside a sunflower magnet. In your hands, a letter from her teacher praising her newfound brightness. Around you, shelves filled with books, flowers on the table, laughter drifting from her bedroom. You realized then that you had stepped into a new season, not one handed down by tradition, but one you created with care. And in that season, the lesson was clear. Family isn't defined by blood, but by presence, by choice, by love given freely. The past had left scars, yes. But scars don't just mark pain, they mark healing. And healing had finally found its place in your home. As autumn deepened, the air turned crisp, and the trees outside your window burned with shades of amber and red. It should have been a season of family gatherings, of warm dinners and shared laughter. Instead, your mailbox filled with invitations edged in gold and messages wrapped in guilt. One envelope arrived with your mother's handwriting. Inside, words pleaded for reconciliation, laced with phrases about family unity and holidays, not meant to be spent apart. Another came from your sister, promising peace if only you would contribute to another event. A third, from the youngest, suggested a healing retreat with a price tag that made you laugh bitterly. Each note claimed to want closeness, yet each carried a condition, a cost. You sat at the table with those letters spread before you. For years, you would have felt your chest tighten, your mind racing, calculating what could be spared. But now, you simply breathed. Because your daughter's school photo sat propped against the saltsugar, her smile bright and unguarded. That photo reminded you. She mattered more than any performance of togetherness. So, you placed the letters in a drawer, alongside others you had chosen not to answer. A drawer that no longer represented shame, but strength. There were nights when doubt tried to creep back in. When memories of holidays past whispered that maybe you were too harsh, too unforgiving. But then you would remember the heaviness in your daughter's question after her birthday. Am I not important enough? Close quote, and you knew the answer was simple. She was important enough. She always would be. One evening, after a long day at work, you returned home to find your daughter at the kitchen table, carefully cutting construction paper into shapes. "What are you making?" Close quote, you asked, setting down your bag. She held up a paper chain, each loop decorated with drawings of hearts and stars. "For Christmas," close quote, she said. "So our tree will feel special." The simplicity of her joy broke something open inside you. You realized that the magic you had been chasing through expensive gifts and elaborate gatherings was already here in her laughter, in her creativity, in the quiet warmth of a home built on love instead of expectation. As December neared, your small house glowed with handmade decorations. Strings of popcorn draped across the tree, ornaments crafted from school projects, tulips in a vase despite the winter chill. Guests arrived not with demands, but with kindness. Mrs. Wilson brought cider. James carried a casserole so heavy it took both hands. Aunt Carol drove down with a tin of cookies and an album she had made titled Our Family of Two. The room filled with voices that expected nothing but gave everything. Laughter echoed, light and real. And as you stood in that kitchen, watching your daughter show off her telescope bought from a garage sale, you felt a peace you hadn't known in years. Still, echoes of the past lingered. On social media, another post appeared, your name twisted into accusations of selfishness. Friends from long ago added their sympathy to your sister's tales. For a moment, your hand hovered over the keyboard, paragraphs forming in your mind. Explanations, proofs, receipts. But then you remembered your daughter's drawing on the fridge, the one labeled My Hero. And you chose silence. Because sometimes the truest strength lies not in defending yourself, but in living your truth so fully that defense is no longer necessary. Weeks turned into months. You joined a support group for single parents, meeting others who carried stories of sacrifice and resilience. You volunteered at your daughter's school once a month, your presence met with smiles that reminded you of the difference one person can make. And slowly, brick by brick, you built a life not defined by what you escaped, but by what you were creating. It was during one of those quiet evenings that your daughter, now more confident, stood before her class with a poster board presentation. She spoke of bravery, of kindness, of love that doesn't hurt. And though she didn't say your name, you knew every word was about you. Her teacher later wrote a note. She shines when she talks about her home. Thank you for giving her that. And in that moment, all the sleepless nights, all the painful choices, all the tears shed in silence, every bit of it felt worth it. Because you had broken the cycle. Because you had chosen her, chosen yourself, chosen a different path. The following spring, your uncle reached out, the brother of the father who had left years ago. He spoke softly, sharing pieces of history you had never heard. How your mother had drained not only you, but your father too. How his leaving was not abandonment, but survival. You sat at the table with the phone pressed to your ear, staring at a photo of your father at a birthday long ago, eyes hollow in a way you now recognized. History repeating itself, your uncle said. But you had chosen to stop it. Tears filled your eyes as you looked around your own kitchen. Your daughter coloring quietly in the next room. The shelves James had built. The flowers blooming on the windowsill. You whispered a promise to yourself. The cycle ends here. And so it did. By summer, you and your daughter spent weekends at the park, chasing basketballs across empty courts, eating melting ice cream sundaes in a booth where strangers offered to take your photo. Those snapshots, imperfect and messy, became treasures, proof that joy could exist without perfection, without approval, without the weight of those who never showed up. One evening, she turned to you, sticky with chocolate, and said, "I like this better than parties." And you laughed, because you felt the same. Better than parties, better than guilt, better than anything that came with a price tag. And as another year rolled forward, you found yourself no longer haunted by the fear of rejection. Instead, you carried a quiet strength, rooted not in what you had given away, but in what you had chosen to keep. Dignity, peace, love. Your daughter's laughter filled the spaces that once echoed with silence. Neighbors and friends became the family you once longed for. And you, once the provider for everyone else, had finally become a protector of your own heart and hers. Because in the end, family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who holds your hand when the world grows heavy. Family is who loves without a bill attached. And you had found that family not in the ones who demanded, but in the ones who stayed. As the seasons turned, you understood something you had missed for so long. Peace is not given, it is chosen. It was never about the grand tables or the polished photographs meant to impress the world. It was about evenings filled with quiet laughter, mornings without dread, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her child. Your daughter's smile became the truest measure of success. No longer weighed down by disappointment, she bloomed in classrooms, in parks, in the small everyday moments that once went unnoticed. You realized then that the cycle of pain had ended, not with anger, but with courage, the courage to say no, and the courage to build something new. The story you carry now is not one of loss, but of renewal. Of learning that real family is not defined by blood.